Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Much of today's civil service debate focuses on giving presidents greater control over the federal workforce. But if you go back to some core conservative principles, the case for a professional, merit-based civil service becomes stronger, not weaker. Joining me to make that case is Christopher Walker, professor of law at the University of Michigan. Chris, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
I'm really interested in your perspective on this topic because the current popular narrative says that conservatives and the professional civil service are fundamentally at odds. You argue that's historically inaccurate. So tell me more about your position here.
I guess I would back up and say I think that Republicans generally have, believed in a unitary executive, right? That the president should have the final say or control of the executive branch. And so there has been tensions between the civil service and that view, but we've got to a different level now on the right, and you see kind of this idea of this deep state narrative that the civil service is bad for a Republican administration. And I argue in an essay that that's not true. I mean, if you care about limited government, if you care about the rule of law, if you care about predictability and stability in markets, you should really want a professionalized civil service as well.
You make a distinction between political accountability and professional expertise, and that is sometimes at the core of the conversation today. How do you think those two things are different? Why do you believe government needs both?
My vision, which isn't just mine, I think it's also a majority of the current Supreme Court, is that, at the end of the day, you have an agency head, the leadership of the agency that's appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and is removable at will by the president. In other words, if the president doesn't like what the agency is doing, the president can fire the agency head. Now, of course, there are costs to that. I mean, it's not like a free fire. I mean, they have to pay the political costs and get someone else confirmed or in that position. But underneath that, you have inferior officers, government officials, and the civil service. And the civil service is hired and fired based on merit. And the idea there is we're trying to get serious experts that are going to last beyond just one presidential administration. And they're there to provide their expert advice and recommendations to the political leadership. So in other words, they should have a degree of decisional independence to look at the facts, to make recommendations, to find facts and apply it to law to make policy. And ultimately, though, the agency head, if the agency head doesn't agree with that, can come in and say, no, we're going to do something different. And I think that's the model that kind of preserves both agency expertise and political accountability within the administrative state.
That has been the model that we've operated on for most of the recent past, but much of today's debate actually focuses on whether presidents should have more control over those career officials, those mid-tier folks who are actually executing and building policy and programs. So what does the political leadership gain if it has greater authority over hiring and firing of those folks?
I mean, so that's a short-term game. I mean, you can imagine when a new, presidential administration comes into office, they're going to want to do a lot of stuff that the prior agency wasn't doing, and they may want to be really, really aggressive. And if you have a professionalized civil service in place, it's going to be harder for a new president to move very quickly. It's also going to be a lot harder for a new president to violate the law. In other words, to do things that Congress has not authorized that agency to do. And so if you're caring about the pure politics of that, you can imagine not wanting those barriers. I might call it not barriers, speed bumps in the way of doing what you want to do.
But speed bumps are often there to help keep us safe. So what are the risks of taking this approach?
The risks are pretty clear, right? I mean, you risk the idea of a new administration coming in and not following the law, and not doing what Congress, the branch that we elect to make the law, has commanded that the executive branch do. And so you see agencies stray far outside their lanes. And not just that, they oftentimes do so without any expertise, right? And so even if you think this is good policy to change the way we regulate a particular market, if you don't have the expertise there to help guide that, even if it's going in a direction that's unlawful, but could be lawful if Congress passes a law, you end up with a really haphazard, unpredictable process. And it creates a regulatory environment that's bad for business, it's bad for individuals. And so I think that's one reason why you want to have a professionalized civil service. Now, I will say, I keep on using the word professionalized. I recognize that not every single person that works in the federal government is awesome, and some should be fired, on the merits. And we should be able to hire folks that are qualified. So I'm not saying the system is perfect, but I would prefer this with some speed bumps over a system where you don't have any at all.
Chris Walker is a professor of law at the University of Michigan School of Law. So, Chris, your article is called A Conservative Case for the Professionalized Civil Service. Make that case for me. What is the conservative case for a merit-based civil service?
Yeah, I will say this is more of a traditionalist conservative, markets conservative approach. And the idea here is that if what you care about is government moving slowly, if you care about government being predictable and stable, in other words, if you're running a business and you want to be able to invest for the next 20, 25 years, the civil service is going to help make sure that the regulatory environment is more stable, more predictable, more expert driven. And so while you still might have higher regulatory costs than if you had a president can't come in that just deregulated a whole industry, you can at least plan for and invest in your operations along those lines. So I think that's the business case. On the liberty case, whoever's in the White House is going to change. We're going to elect someone different from a different political party, a different perspective. And they're going to have different priorities, and they might be tempted to not follow the law. And that could be on the left or the right. And so if what you ultimately care about is that we're protected against government overreach, it might seem counterintuitive to some, but the civil service is a really key ingredient in that recipe of kind of controlling the government from going too far.
You're making the case for stable, predictable regulatory regimes that enable long-term investment in business. Sometimes in the current environment, we care more about fast change that feels different. So if an agency maybe has become too insulated or too resistant to presidential direction, how do you respond to that concern?
Yeah, so this is why it's important that the model that I'm advocating for has political accountability as well. Ultimately, if an agency head makes a lawful, command of the civil service of inferior officers and they don't follow it, that's grounds for firing, right? And so what you have in that situation is the agency head still has the ability to structure and control within lawful grounds. If they're fired, then that civil servant can bring a challenge in court. I'm oversimplifying a bit, but ultimately bring a challenge in court. And so they would be able to see whether it was a lawful command. But so long as it's lawful commands, the agency head does have a lot of control to do that. Now, is there still a cost of speed? Absolutely. I'm not going to deny that. Things are going to move more slowly in a government where we have a civil service. But candidly, if you look at the founding, the federal government was supposed to move slowly. The way we designed Congress, the way we designed separation of powers, the way we designed states, federalism system, we imagined that the federal government wouldn't have the capacity to move at warp speed, that there would be veto gates and speed bumps along the way. And those are there to help protect us, protect our liberty, and help protect stability in the markets.
So, as agencies continue to adapt to the workforce changes under this current administration, what should policymakers be watching for to ensure that they preserve both accountability and expertise?
So, there are a couple different on the civil service side. One, and this is not like law, this is more politics, but there's definitely been a move to demoralize the civil service, and it's going to really clog the pipelines or discourage the pipeline from even going with respect to really professional, lawyers and policymakers and scientists and other experts from joining government. And so I don't know how to fix that, but I think policymakers need to be thinking seriously about how do we make this position, and maybe it's more pay, maybe it's more, resources or benefits. I don't know what it is, but I think that's something that in the next administration with a hopefully more vibrant Congress, they're going to do. On the other side, you also have, it turns out that Congress has allowed the president to have more control over the civil servants that have a lot of policymaking authority. And I candidly think that's a good thing. At some point, a civil servant goes from being an intermediate, like middle manager to an actual more higher ranking policymaker. And I think that's good. And President Trump has been very aggressive in how to categorize those that are in that higher level that he can more easily fire. And I think Congress needs to take a much closer look at that and figure out, are we striking the right balance there? Are we allowing the president to designate too many people, that are not quite at that highest level? to fall into what we might call, we used to call it Schedule F. I think now we're calling it Schedule Policy/Career. And so that's an area where I think that Congress needs to take a closer look as well.
Chris Walker is a professor of law at the University of Michigan Law School. Thanks so much for joining me, Chris. I really appreciate your perspective on this issue.
Awesome. Great.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.